Beginnings of Loma Linda's story link with what I referred to yesterday as God's space. It's a space which unfolds the story of his undeniable presence, which shapes the pathway of new creative, visionary direction, not based on human assumptions, but on a firm conviction in God's design plan. No wonder the voice that nurtured and guided the progressive growth of the church spoke with such conviction about this place. This is the very property we ought to have. The place we need to think about seriously. And this called for action. Do not delay. This is just what is needed. Just for a moment, permit my imagination to run wild, but maybe not so wild. You see, a place is a place, a spot of land, ordinary land made of dirt, which God, the Creator, shaped into the beauty of human life. What makes the difference? Such an ordinary place transformed into God's space. And God's space provides an inspiration and motivational framework for all who struggle with doubts, fears, and even question whether God is a real deal. You see, a greater vision, a visionary dream inspired by God's patient guidance generates decisiveness of action, and it draws attention to the passion of his heart. No wonder that Ellen White, in her own struggles how to understand the connection between the past and its relationship to the present, challenged the church to recapture the faithfulness, zeal, and commitment of the forefathers and inject the same passion into the ongoing story of the future. Such a conviction inspires boldness to overcome challenges. As I said yesterday, connection with our heritage, defined as God's space, helps us to maintain our roots amid lives characterized by mobility and continual constant change. What blows my mind is the simple fact that for this purpose, God used a woman, not an educated woman. And as I enter into the space of God's mystery, I need to say to myself, Lord, let me be humble to hear what you want me to hear. And this morning, I intend to continue to unfold another aspect of the Loma Linda story. You see, as early as 1902, Ellen White challenged the movement with a vision for the presence of medical institutions in Southern California. It was not her vision, it was God's vision. And in 1902, she wrote, I have been shown that in Southern California, there are properties for sale in which buildings are already erected that could be utilized for our work. And that such properties will be offered to us at much less than their original cost. You see, friends, it's one thing to step out in faith and act, but it's another matter to maintain a dynamic boldness, believing that in some way God will provide the means. Through Ellen White's decisive influence and conviction, God's leading, John Burton borrowed $1,000 to hold the property, knowing that he could lose it. At that time, he was earning $15 per week as an ordained minister. What a commitment. The terms offered to Burden were $5,000 down payment and like amounts in August due to on July 16, that's September due on August 26, and finally in December. The agreed price for the property was $40,000, so now they had to raise $4,000 additional dollars. You see, from here on unfolds the story of human responsiveness to God's space. And then unfolds the dynamic interplay between steps in faith and doubt, hesitancy, and fears. A meeting was set to place the challenge before the Los Angeles Carr Street Church on June 12. Ellen White spoke of the vision about the Loma Linda, and the church members voted in favor of securing the property for the sanitarium. However, the Southern California Conference felt that more churches should be involved in this enterprise, for they set a meeting for June 20. However, down payment was due on June 15. And on June 20, the constituency of Southern California held a meeting. Discussion took place whether Loma Linda should be purchased or whether it would be operated by private corporation or by the conference taking the financial responsibility. Ellen White spoke at that time, for about an hour. And she outlined the vision for the medical missionary work in Southern California. But due to financial debt, the conference officers hesitated and cautioned against drastic moves. Came the time for the first down payment. And so in the meantime, the down payment required to be paid on June 15. They needed to raise another $4,000. A farmer from the coast provided $2,400. Another sister gave $1,000 at the risk of losing it. But she said nothing would stop her. That's a commitment. Burden talked to his friends, and he said, I don't have money, but I'll mortgage my house for the cause. And the June payment was made in time. The Loma Linda story connects, you see, with God's story. Let me take you now to the meeting of the constituency on June 20. Quite challenging meeting. Present was Alder Urban, the newly elected General Conference General Conference Vice President. He took the floor, recalling God's providential leading in Australia and in setting up the Avondale School. And what I want to say now, that Loma Linda's story connects with the story of God's space in Avondale. God's space, friends, does not have barriers. For it is the story of God's visionary guidance. And Ellen White at that time, and he describes Ellen White's experience in the following word. Let me read to you the story. In the darkest hour of the establishment of the Avondale School, when the outlook seemed discouraging, I was sitting in the rented hotel in Currumbong, completely wearied out by the complaints regarding the land. My heart was sick and sore, but suddenly a great peace came upon me. Angels seemed to be in the room. And then the words were spoken, "Look ye, look beyond." And I saw flourishing, cultivating land, bearing its treasures of fruit and root crops. Many resources were spread out before me. And wherever my eyes was directed, I saw prosperity. However, a more significant thing happened. I saw the school filled with promising students. All seemed to be helped by the inspiration of efforts to stand and work on the high platform. Great life and peace came upon me. I was so pleased that I praised the Lord aloud, saying, His word is fulfilled. God will spread a table in the wilderness. You see, friends, it's not about land per se. It's not about walls and bricks. It's about people. God's vision is about people. And I would like to suggest to you that voices from within God's space share encouragement, hope, and trust in God's leading. And although there was a time of tension at that meeting, constituency meeting, Alder Urban said the following: although the conference is heavily in that, I believe it to be to the glory of God that the conference should assume the responsibility. And you know what? His words of encouragement turned the tide. The money flowed in. The daughter of General Harrison Gray promised to give $10,000 if she could release money from another commitment. But although the constituencies supported the purchase of Loma Linda, the prevailing spirit of hesitancy remained. And on June 25, Ellen White wrote a letter to Alder Urban. I hope that brother will move understandingly in the reference to the sanitarium already in operation. And then she moved on to say, do not be discouraged. She said to Brother Burden, if in a way there is some cutting across of your plans, and if you are somewhat hindered, don't be discouraged. But I hope that we shall never again have to meet the hindrance that we have met in the past because of the way in which things have been conducted in some lines in Southern California. I have seen the hold back principles followed, and I have seen the displeasure of the Lord because of this. If the same spirit is manifested, I shall not consent to keep silent as I have done. And friends, something interesting happened on June 26, because a due date came for the repayment, the second repayment. Ellen White made attempts to raise money, but she was not successful. People suggested that perhaps some of the land should be sold. I just thought to write to you a few lines, she wrote to Burden, to assure you that not 1 foot of the land is to be sold to raise money. We will hire money at the bank rather than this shall be done. It only shows, Brother Burden responded to her, that the enemy is determined to hedge up the way, if possible. And he said, at point of discouragement, I do not know where to go and how to find assurance for the money on time. And so the committee met again, and something interesting happened. As the committee gathered, as they waited, money did not come. And at that point, someone suggested, has the postman arrived? Is the mail in? And they realized that the mail has not arrived. And then suddenly the mail came in, and among the letters was one bearing the postmark from Atlantic City. They opened the letter and found a draft for $5,000 needed for the repayment. We thank God and took new courage in believing that the Lord was going before us. However, friends, the battle was not over, because the Southern California camp meeting, Southern California camp meeting was scheduled for August 11 to 21 in Los Angeles. They've made a preparation to deal with the spirit of hesitancy. We also, that very much was at stake, and that much depended on how the sanitarium work was presented to our people at this time. We knew there was a hard battle to fight in Los Angeles camp meeting, a battle against indifference, distrust, fear, and selfishness, and we've tried to make a thorough preparation. And friends, the interesting is that in August, the payments were made in time. In December, the payments were made in time. And instead of taking 3 years to pay the second $20,000, the purchase price, as stipulated in the contract, it was taken care of within 6 months. Brother Burton wrote, as we moved forward in faith, the Lord opened the way for us, and the money came in from unexpected resources. And in conclusion, let me recapture a snippet from the dedication of Loma Linda Sanitarium. Ellen White shared that Sabbath morning a sermon in which she reviewed God's leading in the purchase of Loma Linda and outlined the purpose of the establishment of the sanitarium. Loma Linda is to be not only a sanitarium, but an educational center. With the possession of this place comes the weighty responsibility of making the work of the institution educational in character. A school is to be established here for the training of the gospel, medical, missionary, evangelists. But more significant than the scenery and the beautiful buildings of this institution to densely populated districts and the opportunity of communicating to many people a knowledge of the third angel's message. Her vision was far beyond the land and the place. Her concern and God's concern is for the people. People for a longing for the knowledge of God. And then she said, we are to have clear, please note, clear spiritual discernment. My question is, how do we learn to discern God's movements in people's lives? We teach people what to believe, how to believe, and what to do. But how do we teach them to discern God's movement in people's lives and in history? She said we are to have clear spiritual discernment, else we shall fail to understand the opening providences of God that are preparing the way for us to enlighten the world. The crisis is just before us. Now is the time for sound of warning message by the agencies that God has given for this purpose. Let us remember that one most important agency is our medical missionary work. Never are we to lose sight of the great object for which our sanitarium are established. The advancement of God's closing work on the earth. And so, my concluding thought is this. Loma Linda's story is God's story. The story of life and faith in God's space. It's a story of God who shapes a visionary pathway for the movement.